2:21 a.m., inside a dimly lit room where even the silence felt heavy. Hilda Dokubo was said to be sitting alone, unable to hold it in any longer, as memories of a marriage, reportedly filled with pain and emotional scars, began to surface again. And the name, Evelyn Omavowan Oboro, once whispered with love, was now, according to some sources, at the center of a storm she could no longer hide from. According to what has been circulating quietly for years, the story did not begin with chaos, but with something that looked almost perfect. A young woman stepping into love. A union that many believed would stand the test of time. A marriage that would stretch across decades. Nearly 30 years, built on promises, shared dreams, and silent sacrifices that no one outside could truly see. In the early years, those close to her were said to have noticed small changes, subtle, almost invisible to the public eye. A smile that lingered a second too short, a hesitation before speaking, a glance that seemed to carry more weight than words. But nothing was confirmed, nothing was spoken, and like many stories behind closed doors, it remained buried beneath appearances. As time moved forward, her career continued. Her name remained respected, her presence on screen powerful. Yet behind that strength, according to whispers, there were nights filled with tension, moments of fear, and a growing emotional distance that no audience could ever witness. Some sources suggest that conflicts within the family began to intensify. Not all at once, but gradually, like cracks forming in glass, barely noticeable at first, until one day, they could no longer be ignored. Arguments, silence, reconciliation attempts, and then silence again. A cycle, repeating, over years. From another perspective, there are those who say the pressure was not only personal, but also professional. Allegedly, disagreements over career choices, roles, and commitments began to overlap with domestic tension, blurring the line between public success and private struggle. And somewhere in that overlap, the emotional toll began to show. Then came the turning point. Though no exact date was ever confirmed, it was said that something shifted, something irreversible. According to certain reports, the emotional strain had reached a level where staying became more painful than leaving. And for the first time, the idea of walking away was no longer just a thought, but a possibility. Those close to her, or at least those who claimed to be, described a woman torn between endurance and survival. A mother, a public figure, a wife, carrying roles that demanded strength, while privately, she was said to be struggling to hold herself together. And then, slowly, the silence began to break, not with a loud declaration, but with fragments, carefully chosen words, moments where the truth seemed to slip through, just enough for people to notice, but never enough to fully confirm. Phrases like, "It was difficult," "It changed me," "There were things I could not say," began to appear, leaving the audience, reading between the lines. At the same time, there were also mentions, unverified, but persistent, about her health. According to some, the years of emotional strain had begun to reflect physically. Fatigue, stress-related conditions, a body that, as some described, no longer carried the same resilience it once had. But again, nothing officially confirmed, only observations and concern. From yet another angle, Some voices suggested that the separation was not sudden, but long overdue, that what the public saw as a breaking point was in fact the result of years of silent endurance, and when she finally stepped away, it was not out of impulse, but necessity. And yet, despite everything, there remains a silence. No full story, no complete explanation, no definitive version of events, just pieces scattered across interviews, reactions, and interpretations. Each one adding another layer, but never forming a complete picture. Because somewhere, between what is said and what is left unsaid, there is still a space, a quiet room, a dim light, still on, Hilda sitting there, not speaking, as if some stories are too heavy to ever be told completely. According to some sources, the marriage that lasted nearly 3 decades was said to be far from the peaceful image the public once believed in, and the name Evelyn Omavowan Oboro began to surface in stories no one ever expected to hear. Many people believe that behind closed doors there were moments that never reached the outside world, moments described not with clarity, but with fragments, tension, raised voices, and long stretches of silence that felt heavier than any argument. According to certain accounts, what appeared stable from afar may have been slowly unraveling, piece by piece. There are claims, unverified, but repeated, suggesting that emotional strain was not the only thing present. Some sources indicate that the relationship may have crossed into darker territory, where conflict became something more intense, something harder to define, and even harder to escape. Words like pressure, control, and fear began to appear, though never officially confirmed, always carried carefully, as if even speaking them out loud could change everything. From another point of view, there are those who say the situation was complicated, layered, not easily reduced to a single narrative. That what some interpret as harm, others describe as misunderstanding, as clashes that escalated over time, shaped by years of shared history, expectations, and emotional fatigue. But even in those interpretations, one detail seems to remain constant. Something was breaking, slowly, but inevitably. It was also said that there were nights when the silence inside the house felt louder than any crowd she had ever faced. Nights where decisions were considered, reconsidered, postponed, as if leaving was not just about walking away, but about unraveling an entire life built over decades. And then, according to multiple whispers, came the moment. Not loud, not public, but final, a shift, where enduring was no longer possible, and staying began to feel like something far more dangerous than leaving. There was a time when everything seemed complete, a stage filled with lights, applause echoing through the air, and, at the center of it all, Hilda Dokubo, a woman many admired, not just for her talent, but for what she represented: strength, dignity, and a life that appeared balanced between fame and family. According to those who remember those early years, her marriage was once spoken of as something stable, something admirable, a partnership that, at least from the outside, looked grounded, built on shared values, mutual support, and a quiet understanding that didn't need to be explained. There were moments, captured in photographs, smiles that seemed genuine, hands held, not for the cameras, but naturally, a family, growing together. And in those moments, Evelyn Omavowan Oboro was not a name surrounded by controversy, but simply a partner standing beside her. From another perspective, colleagues and close acquaintances were said to describe her as someone deeply committed, not only to her craft, but to her home, balancing long hours on set with responsibilities that extended far beyond the public eye. She carried herself with a kind of quiet determination that many found inspiring. It was also a time when her career was evolving, roles becoming more significant, her presence more recognized, and yet, despite the growing spotlight, she seemed grounded. Many believed she had found a way to hold everything together. A career, a family, a marriage, all moving in harmony. But even in those early days, there were details so small they almost disappeared. A pause before answering a simple question. A look that didn't quite match the smile. A silence that lasted just a second too long. Nothing obvious, nothing anyone could point to, just moments that passed unnoticed, as if the story that everyone saw was only one part of something much deeper. But then something began to shift, not suddenly, not in a way anyone could clearly point to, but slowly, almost silently. There were pauses that didn't exist before, moments that felt slightly off. At first, no one noticed. A missed appearance here, a cancelled event there, small absences explained away as fatigue, work, or personal time. But according to some observers, those absences started to become more frequent and harder to ignore. From another angle, people who had followed her closely began to mention subtle changes. The way she spoke, a little more carefully. The way she smiled, a little less freely. As if every expression carried a weight no one could fully understand. There were also moments captured unintentionally. A glance that seemed distant. Eyes that no longer reflected the same warmth. And then, quickly, everything would return to normal, or at least appear to be. According to certain sources, there were periods where she seemed to withdraw, not completely, but just enough for those paying attention to feel it. Interviews became shorter, appearances more controlled, and sometimes she simply wasn't there at all. Many believed it was just the natural rhythm of a demanding life, a woman balancing too many roles, needing space, needing rest. But others, quietly, began to wonder, because alongside those absences, there were also reports, subtle, unconfirmed, of tension, not visible, not spoken, but present, like something lingering in the background, waiting from yet another perspective. Some described it as a kind of emotional distance, not just from the public, but possibly from everything around her, as if she was still there, still performing, still showing up, but not entirely, as if a part of her had already stepped away. And still, no one said anything, no statements, no confirmations, just silence and small details that didn't seem important until they started to repeat. A look, a pause, an absence, again and again, until it no longer felt like coincidence. Some people close to her, quietly, began to say that what was happening inside that home may have gone far beyond what anyone would call ordinary conflict. According to certain accounts, there were moments not always visible, not always heard, but felt moments where tension did not fade, but stayed, lingering in the air. Many stories, told in fragments, never complete, never officially confirmed, suggested that disagreements were no longer just words, but something heavier, something that, according to some, changed the atmosphere entirely. There are claims, careful, uncertain, that there were times when the space she lived in no longer felt like a home, but something else, something harder to define. From another perspective, some believe it was not constant, but unpredictable, quiet one moment and overwhelming the next, a cycle that made it difficult to find stability, to find peace, and within that cycle, according to whispers, there were nights, long, silent, where even the smallest sound felt amplified. A door closing, footsteps, a pause, as if everything could shift at any second. But still, nothing was said, not publicly, not clearly, just pieces, shared carefully, almost reluctantly, as if even those telling them were unsure how much should be heard. And then there are those who say, there came a point where staying no longer felt like a choice, but something else entirely, something that many would later describe, not with certainty, but with a feeling that it had become a place she could no longer escape from. What surprised many people the most was not only what was said to have happened, but the fact that Hilda Dokubo chose to remain silent for so many years. According to those who followed her closely, there were no public accusations, no dramatic confrontations, no sudden revelations, just a quiet presence, continuing, as if nothing had changed, even when, according to some, everything already had. From the outside, she was still working, still appearing, still carrying herself with that same composed strength people had always associated with her. But from another perspective, many believe that silence itself was telling a different story. There are accounts suggesting that she learned to adapt, to endure, to move through each day without allowing anything to break through. Not in front of cameras, not in front of others, as if speaking might have made everything too real. Some say it was a choice, a decision made to protect her family, her image, or perhaps herself. Others believe it was something deeper, a feeling of being trapped between what was and what could be, because leaving, according to certain voices, was never simple, not after decades, not after building a life, layer by layer. And so, the silence continued, not empty, but full of things, unsaid, full of moments, unshared. There were times people noticed a pause, a distant look, as if her thoughts had drifted somewhere else, somewhere far. Some described it as exhaustion, others as resilience, but no one could say for certain what it truly meant, because when someone chooses silence for that long, it is rarely without reason. And yet, even in that silence, she remained present, visible, but somehow untouched, as if a part of her had been holding on to something no one else could see. There were days when she appeared, with a body that seemed more fragile than before. Not dramatically, not in a way that would make headlines, but enough for those watching closely to begin asking questions. According to some observers, there were subtle signs, a slower step, a pause before standing up, a hand resting a little longer against a chair. Small things, almost invisible, unless you were really looking. There were also moments, captured in passing, where her eyes looked tired, not just physically, but something deeper, as if sleep was no longer enough, as if rest couldn't reach whatever was weighing on her. Some people pointed out changes in her appearance, nothing specific, nothing confirmed, just a sense that her energy was not the same. From another perspective, there were those who believed it could simply be the passage of time, the natural toll of a demanding life. But others, quietly, connected it to everything else, to the silence, to the tension, to the years. According to certain whispers, there were instances where she seemed momentarily distant, as if her focus had slipped away. Even in the middle of conversations, a brief absence that returned just as quickly. And then there were the details. People weren't sure how to explain a faint mark that appeared and disappeared, a gesture carefully controlled, a way of moving that suggested something was being hidden. But no one said anything directly, no confirmation, no explanation, just observations passed quietly from one person to another, as if even speaking about it felt risky. Because sometimes it's not the obvious things, but the smallest details, the ones that don't make sense, that stay, that linger, that make people wonder whether everything that was happening was beginning to leave a mark, not just on her life, but on her body as well. At this moment, there are no further official confirmations, no clear statements, no final explanations. Everything seems to remain right where it was left, between what has been shared and what still hasn't been said. According to available accounts, Hilda Dokubo has not offered a complete version of events, only fragments, carefully spoken or quietly implied. And beyond those fragments, there is only silence. From another perspective, some believe that silence is intentional, a way to hold on to privacy, a way to avoid reopening what may have taken years to survive. Others see it differently, not as protection, but as something unresolved, something still waiting. But no one can say for certain, because there are no official records, no verified confirmations, only stories, repeated, retold, reshaped, depending on who speaks and who listens. And the name Evelyn Omavowan Oboro remains present but undefined, mentioned but never fully explained, as if it exists somewhere in the background of everything, yet at the center of nothing. For now, everything stays unfinished, held together by uncertainty and quiet, a kind of stillness that doesn't resolve, doesn't clarify, only waits. A room, the light still on, a chair placed quietly by the window. Hilda Dokubo, sitting there, not speaking, just still, the air heavy, almost unmoving, a curtain shifting slightly with the night breeze, her eyes fixed somewhere, not outside, not inside, somewhere in between. A phone lying on the table, screen dark, no calls, no messages, just silence, her hand resting gently, not trembling, but not at ease, as if holding on to something that cannot be seen. Seconds pass, or maybe minutes. No one knows, because nothing changes. The light still on, the chair still there, and her unchanged, as if some stories are never told until everything else has already fallen silent.